Well, I just drove like a madman across Croatia to get here to the Pula Arena in Pula, right on the coast. It being not exactly that obscure and being in the middle of a city, it has business hours, which means you can show up late, like I did. But 20 euros in the right hands will get you 10 minutes inside with nobody else, so see what it's like to stand in the middle of a Roman arena, in the middle of a Coliseum, like a gladiator would. The stones that make up Pula Arena have seen a lot over the last 2,000 years. Hundreds of years of gladiators fighting to the death. Men going toe-to-toe with desperate wild animals, both literally just trying to survive to their next meal, and hopefully not become a meal themselves. It has seen medieval stage acts, Renaissance revelry, and communist speeches. And today, the sound of Grammy-winning artists and rock stars bounce off the rock. It started its life for one purpose though, and that was for the spectacle of the gladiatorial games. Combat sports are a great equalizer. It doesn't matter where you come from or what your status is in society. When you enter into a ring with someone else with no other intent than to do as much harm to that person as possible, pedigree just doesn't matter. The same held true for gladiators. A common misunderstanding is that all gladiators were slaves or prisoners, forced to duel to the death for the spectacle of it all, condemned to die on the dirt floor of the arena. This was very true reality for some, but not most who would fight. Those that came to this world as criminals and prisoners of war were known as noxi. Slaves were referred to as demnati. Both these groups were mostly expected to put on a decent show and have their blood spilled. A new guy who had yet to fight was a novicius, and one who had had at least one fight under his belt, a veterani. When the novicius stepped out for the first battle, he was a Tironis gladiator, or just Tyros. Some would go into their first bout as a novicius, fight as a Tyros, and die before ever being called a veterani. If you were there to pay off a debt, you were an octorati. Paired fighters who worked in tandem were ordinari. Those who fought animals and beasts, venationes or bestiari, hunters. Some were free men who volunteered to be gladiators looking for fame and fortune. Most were someone else's property, forced to fight. All made up the Familia Gladiatorium, and all swore an oath of Sacramentum Gladiatorium that they would fight as hard as they could, and if they fail, they will face the sword with dignity and not cower. And there's a reason for this, which I will touch on later, as to why a man already condemned would play along with his oath and not refuse to participate, even if you were in a sine missione, or no mercy fight. Gladiators were trained by the Ionista, whose career was the buying, selling, and training and preparing of fighters, at their own personal Ludi Gladiatorium, school for gladiators. The largest and most famous was of course in Rome, the Ludus Magnus. It didn't matter if you were Noxi or Damnati, Novicius or Veterani, Octorati or Volunteer. All of you would be seen by a Medici, a doctor, to ensure that you were in good health. A sick criminal or slave was essentially useless, and would probably not live to see many more days. Water, food, and physical comforts were given to keep a gladiator in good form. These men were the equivalent of prize fighters, mixed martial artists, and could probably even be compared to racehorses of their day. These men were assets, commodities really. They could be a multi-year salary for their owners, and in doing so would bring fame, notoriety, and maybe even freedom for themselves. At the Ludi Gladiatorium, they would learn over 20 different styles of fighting. Everything from lightweight leather cladding with only a net as a weapon, to full-on metal armor able to take a blow from a sword or a hammer. You may be volunteered to participate in a mock sea battle, in a flooded Coliseum on real boats, or use a spear to fend off a circle of starving tigers, or go face to face with a 20-year veteran with hundreds of victories, in full armament, with sword and shield. There was a show to put on after all, and the better you were, the longer you lived. The longer you lived, the more likely you may someday be free again. Free and famous. Free and rich. At larger amphitheaters like the Coliseum and here at Pula, gladiatorial games would only happen 10 to 12 times per year, so maybe once per month, unless it was a celebration of a particular victory or holiday, in which case the games could go on for weeks at a time. Advertisements would go up, with painters commissioned to scrawl on public walls with information, including a schedule of the fights, the top billing gladiators, and even if certain amenities would be available like the shade awning. Word of mouth would continue to spread the information. As the days got closer, the organizers would be finalizing preparation, including contracting gladiatorial schools for fighters, warehousing food and vendable items, as well as acquiring all the animals and beasts needed. Teaser events would happen around town, with wild animals like giraffes and zebras paraded down the streets, or caged lions and bears on display to amp up the excitement. This would all support the local economy, with acquisitions for fresh food and vegetables needing to be brought in locally. But how would an average pleb like you and me get in? Well, we would need tickets. A clay tablet with a QR code would be sent to you after you paid a third-party website the ticket cost, plus a 37% handling fee and 12% service charge. Joking aside, the system was very similar to how it is today. Instead of a paper ticket listing your level, section, and row, a shard of pottery would have it stamped into it. It even told you what gate to use of the 15 here at Pula, which cut down on confusion and allowed the arena to be quickly filled and emptied. The Coliseum in Rome had 80 gates. These tickets would often be distributed to higher echelons of citizens, in which case they would trickle down into the hands of well-networked plebeians, and eventually to the more common masses. Just like today, scalpers would be seen around town and outside the gates, charging a fee for the ability to get better seats, or just admission in general. Out of the sight of the commoner, and just like a modern-day venue, behind the scenes, hundreds of workers were preparing for the festivities, both above and below the stands. Last-minute arrangements were needed to ensure that the 23,000 spectators could have access to not only food and water, but also a way to relieve themselves when nature called. Exotic animals would need caring for, and a logistical network to support not only keeping them alive, but also getting them to and from the arena floor when the time came. Everything needed to be ready for the big day. Finally, the day has come. You and your friends head to the arena, ready for some entertainment. Outside are dozens of vendors selling everything from food and drinks to mats and seating cushions, and even exotic items associated with the games. Used weapons that had once been in the hands of a fighter could be purchased. Gladiator sweat and blood could even be bought, to be used in ladies' perfume or in some type of ritual. Gambling, though illegal, could be found in and around the vendors, and if you wanted to increase your odds of winning a bet, you may even find a magician to cast a spell or a curse, for a fee of course. You and your buddies walk up to the guards at your assigned gate and show your pottery shard to them, and in you go. Stepping out into the arena itself, the stands would be tiered based off of your precedence in society. Closest to the arena floor was for the VIPs, senators, and aristocrats. Behind them in the second tier were equestrians, property owners, kind of like the knights of the Roman Empire, patricians, and distinctive members of the upper class. You and me, the commoners, would find our seats behind them in the third tier. Still a pretty good view. Above and behind you may even be a fourth tier for non-citizens and foreigners, women, and any of the poor who found their way in. Much like modern-day events, drinking, chanting, revelry, and maybe even a bit of brawling could break out at any time. A bit of mingling between two consenting adults might also have taken place. After finding a seat, the day would begin. The opening procession, or pompa, would have a parade of trumpeters, scribes, and the event coordinator. These people would be followed by the real stars, the gladiators. Everyone would go to their respective places, as there was a lot to see before the gladiatorial fights in the afternoon. First would be the morning beast hunts, or venaciones. Tamed animals would be put on display, like bears, monkeys, and even seals doing tricks. Exotics like zebras, ostriches, elephants, and giraffes could be paraded about amongst a mock landscape of their homeland. But what the people truly came for was the fights. Animal versus animal, or more excitingly, animal versus human. Lions, tigers, and leopards would be starved to make them more desperate. Bears and crocodiles would add an exotic flair to the fight. At times, dozens of animals could be employed. So popular were the games that the Roman Empire literally drove some species to extinction. The sun would shine down on whoever was in the center of the ring, but the huge sail awnings above you would keep you and your fellow spectators in the shade. Perfumed water was piped through the entirety of the structure at fountains and ancient sprayers to keep the crowd cool and happy. After the Veneziones would come the Meridiani, or lunch break, a sort of Roman seventh-inning stretch or halftime. Patrons would use this time just as we would today at a baseball or football game, getting more drinks and food, using the facilities, visiting the vendors outside to get some fresh sweat or blood. You could even find a professional lady to take into the dark fortresses for a bit of afternoon delight. The fortresses being the alcoves under the stands, which went on to lend its name to the word fornication. If that wasn't your cup of tea, there was the show to watch. During the Meridiani, executions would take place. A gruesome way to keep citizens both entertained and also remind them that they could be the ones receiving capital punishment should they act up in ways that weren't appreciated. These were oftentimes brutal spectacles, recreating martyrs' deaths with real people, flaying, cutting, and allowing the condemned to be ravaged and eaten by animals. And remember the oath I mentioned earlier? The Sacramentum Gladiatorium, where every fighter promises to fight valiantly even to their deaths? Well, it was probably the Meridiani that persuaded them to do it. Better to look to the audience, receive a vote of death, and take a sharp blade to the neck. The alternative was pain. Lots of pain. Eaten by a pack of wolves or hyenas, set on fire, beaten to death. Some were even crushed by massive beasts like elephants or trampled by rhinos. Once the bodies were cleared, the hosts of the event may even give out prizes. Like a t-shirt cannon of today, catapults would launch wooden balls into the crowd with parchment inside. A redeemable prize waiting for the lucky person who not only grabbed it, but held onto it. These could be anything from a bushel of cabbages to food, silver, gold, and even in some cases, whole animals and country estates. Like a $1 million half-court basketball shot or keyhole hockey goal, it could be life-changing. Because of this, those bits of parchment would even be found at the bottom of an all-out brawl, some even ending up fatal. Spectators outside the arena may even offer cash for unopened prize balls as a way to potentially spend a few bucks to make a lot more. After a bit of lunch and a bloody show, the real events began, the Munera, the gladiatorial matches. These were dynamic, interactive showcases. The gladiators, trained and instructed, knew that the crowd was their best friend but also could be their worst enemy. The average fight didn't always end up in death. The no mercy ones always did, but those were usually forced on criminals. But the gladiator was a celebrity athlete. People looked forward to seeing certain men fight, and it made sense that keeping them alive would be lucrative to keeping the money coming in. If you went to a professional sporting event and your favorite player or athlete was beheaded, well, you probably wouldn't go out of your way to be buying a jersey or novelty item associated with them. It wasn't good business to kill off a renowned headliner. Some had special moves they were known for. Others had background music to add to the drama. Headline prize fights would even have referees and could go on for 15 to 20 minutes. In the end, one man may collapse, exhausted, or knocked unconscious, and would be bested. It would be then that the victor could look to the crowd for a decision, which was oftentimes to let them live, especially if he had shown bravery, tenacity, and was stoic in defeat. Respect the fight, respect the people, and they will respect you back. Some gladiators would spend decades fighting, becoming infamous in the empire, and either earning their freedom or buying it. Others still would be so successful that they would be offered freedom only to decline it, to stay in the ring, and continue to walk out in front of thousands of fanatics to fight another day. The reality, though, was that participating in a death sport was not exactly good for longevity. Most wouldn't survive past 10 fights, and many died before reaching the age of 25. The Pula Arena, here in modern-day Croatia, was one of hundreds that could have been found all across the Roman Empire during its height. Pula is one of the best preserved, 2,000 years later, and the only one with all 4 of its towers intact. It is a unique display of how a small city's stadium would have appeared structurally. These were essential to the concept of bread and circuses. The ruling elite were able to keep the citizens from getting too restless or unhappy by plying them with free food and entertainment. Oftentimes, These would be associated with politicians and rulers looking to brighten their image amongst the people and drum up some support in the near future. At times, these men would even participate in the action, only fighting battles they couldn't lose though. Even emperors got in on it, structuring fights to make themselves look like victorious heroes of legendary battles. A cheap tactic, maybe, but also probably successful. Today, Pula is still a venue for entertainment. Elton John, the Foo Fighters, and dozens of other mainstream artists have found their way to coastal Croatia to play in a 2,000-year-old venue. Personally, I'd never be a gladiator. Well, I wouldn't be allowed to. I was an inch too short to die in Mortal Kombat, apparently. Sometimes being of below average stature can save your life. The minimum height requirement was 5'7", which was actually above the average for a Roman citizen. Now, my driver's license says I'm 5'7", but here's the thing about every guy who says he's 5'7". All of us are actually 5'6". It's a fun little lie that we tell. Remember that the next time a fella tells you he's 5'7". If you're interested in other Roman accomplishments, check out this video on Antonine's Wall, where I show you the furthest north the Roman Empire ever got. Thanks for watching, thanks to my Patreon subscribers for helping me get here, and as always until next time, get lost.